Hi everyone, Neil here. I'm here with Alex today. He's just finished his piece on the TCLC, it's a two-parter, explaining what the TCLC is in the first part and then how it relates to battery energy storage in the second part. Alex, I guess the first question is, can you tell us what the TCLC is?
Yeah, sure thing. So the TCLC is the Transmission Constraint License Conditions, and these are it's a set of legislation that sort of comes part and parcel of the Generations License Agreement for GB Generations license holders. The idea is that it stops generators from generating excessively high returns from their generation turn down in situations where there's transmission system constraints.
Okay, and what is a transmission system constraint?
So a transmission system constraint is when, because of some property of the network, you can't get energy from where it needs to be or where it's being generated to where it needs to be consumed. So I guess as a little example, if you've got wind over here that's generating 100 meg, and you've got city over here which is consuming 100 meg of power, and you've got a cable that connects them which is only 90 meg of power, then there'd be a transmission system constraint if that full capacity needs to be transferred.
Okay, and so the TCLC is designed to stop people taking advantage of those transmission constraint periods.
Yeah.
How would somebody take advantage?
Yeah.
Of those
So
periods?
in that situation that I just described, what would happen in the balancing mechanism is that wind would be bid down, so it would be curtailed.
Yeah.
And the TCLC is in place to stop wind pricing at a level which would be overtly expensive to the end consumer.
Okay, nice. So are there any examples of the TCLC actually being enforced? Of this actually happening and that happening in court?
So we have, I guess I think it's 2014 maybe, there was an instance where SSE were fined for breach of the TCLC. But more recently, there are currently two ongoing investigations from Ofgem into Southampton Bank and SSE's 4 years pumped hydro plant. Both of which are essentially alleged to have breached the TCLC for excessively low prices in the BM.
So how do Ofgem know who to investigate?
Great question. Yeah. So the idea is that they take a look at all of the bidding behaviours of all the generators in GB, have a look at how they've priced, and they compare that number to some sort of idea of short-run marginal cost, i.e. the cost of generating 1 megawatt hour of electricity. And if those numbers, I guess, don't match up, it could be construed that the offending party or the alleged offending party is trying to gain excessive benefit or be aggressive in its profiteering strategies. And if that happens, then Ofgem will open an investigation, at which point, any offending parties will have to submit what they call objective justification for their pricing strategy. Yeah.
Okay, so that's how it would work for, say, like pumped hydro or CCGT.
Mm-hmm.
How would it work for storage and battery energy storage in particular, which is it's a different asset class altogether?
Yeah, it's a completely different. I mean, we're not burning things fundamentally, so it's a completely different idea really. But the TCLC still does apply. I guess the important distinction here to make is that balancing actions or turn down actions in the balancing mechanism for battery energy storage can be roughly categorized into two different groups. One is turn down, so when they were expected to be generating power and then they reduced their output. So we'll call this one turn down, and then the other one is like a strict import. So when they weren't intending to produce any power and then they were accepted for a bid to import into the site.
Okay. And what's the difference from a legal standpoint? Between those two things?
So for the TCLC, the TCLC only applies in the instance of turn down, whereas importing power isn't covered under TCLC, which essentially means that if you're doing like a pure BM arbitrage strategy, you aren't under the jurisdiction of the TCLC, whereas if you're turning down your generation, you are.
Nice. So what does this mean locationally?
Okay, yeah, so this is one of the things that is discussed. We hear quite a lot about this actually, which is that if you located a battery in a place where there was transmission system constraints, could you benefit from the higher prices in those locations? And the answer is kind of yes, but consider. Okay. And the idea is if you were doing a pure BM arbitrage strategy, so buying low, selling high, you could take advantage of those locational prices through system actions. But if you're exploiting those transmission constraints for turn down, you would be subject to investigation essentially.
Okay, and I guess what we've seen in last quarter of 2021
Yeah.
is we saw a lot more battery energy storage activity in the BM.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess the general thing that's been happening over the last 6 months really is that we've seen saturation in the frequency response markets, so like DC, FFR, and we've seen record high wholesale prices. So there's been a natural movement from storage away from ancillary services and into merchant. And obviously, when you're managing your state of charge and you're managing your arbitrage positions, your BM activity is sort of necessarily going to increase. So yeah, the TCLC has, I guess, not new importance, but renewed importance for storage.
Nice. Well, I mean, is there anything else you'd like to add?
I guess one important thing to think about here is that the investigation from Ofgem is based on a number of factors, and sometimes there are mitigating circumstances, which means they won't pursue investigation. And the sort of the classic example here is when the impact to the end consumer is really low.
Okay, yeah.
So at the moment, we're seeing storage making up less than 1% of balancing actions. To be realistic, the impact on the consumer is very low at the moment, meaning that investigation is probably a little bit less likely for storage than it is for 1800 megawatt CCGTs.
Yeah, of course, yeah. Size differences.
Yeah, so we're not saying that storage can fly under the radar by any stretch of the imagination, but for the time being at least, investigation is a lot less likely.
Nice. Well, thanks for going through the article with me.
That's not a problem.
Anyone watching this at home, at work, or wherever, you should read both parts of the article. It is actually really great. But yeah, thanks for that, Alex.
Not a problem.
Cool.
See you soon, guys. Take care.
Thanks.